512.25 billion naira generated as value-added tax in Q2 2021, says National Bureau of Statistics. World Bank lists Nigeria and 9 others as countries with high debt risk exposure. Federal government to auction 150 billion naira bonds in August. Plus, oil crawls higher on solid U.S. demand outlook despite Delta surge. This is Business Express reaching you from Abuja, Nigeria's capital. I am Benny Adams, your guide. Good to have you join us on the business side of life, and we start with a cheering news by telling you that Nigeria generated 1 trillion naira in the first half of the year, consisting of 512.25 billion naira in the second quarter and 495.39 billion naira generated in the first quarter. The figures were contained in the sectoral distribution of value-added tax report released on Tuesday by the National Bureau of Statistics. The report read, sectorial distribution of value-added tax data for Q2 2021 reflected that the sum of 512.25 billion naira was generated as VAT in Q2 2021 as against 496.39 billion naira generated in Q1 2021 and 327.2 billion naira generated in Q2 2020, representing 3.02% increase quarter-on-quarter and 56.56% increase year-on-year. The NBS disclosed that out of the total VAT generated, 187.643 billion naira constituted non-import VAT locally, while 207.69 billion naira was generated as non-import VAT for foreign. The balance of 117.13 billion naira was generated from the Nigerian Customs Service import VAT. Moving on, the World Bank says Nigeria is among a list of top 10 countries with high debt risk exposure. It stated this in the financial statement for International Development Association, which was among the World Bank FY21 audited financial statements released on Monday. The financial statement said IDA faces 2 types of credit risks, which are country credit risks and the counterparty credit risks. Country credit risk is the risk of loss due to a country not meeting its contractual obligations, and the counterparty credit risk is a risk of loss attributable to a counterparty not honoring its contractual obligations. It stated that as of June 30, 2021, the 10 countries with the highest exposures accounted for 66% of IDA's total exposure. Nigeria was rated 5th on the list with $11.7 billion IDA debt stock, while India led the list with $22 billion, followed by Bangladesh with $18.1 billion, Pakistan with $16.4 billion, and Vietnam with $14.1 billion IDA debt stock. Other countries on the list in order of appearance include Ethiopia with $11.2 billion, Kenya with $10.2 billion, Tanzania with $3 $8.3 billion, Ghana with $5.6 billion, and Uganda with $4.4 billion IDA debt stock. It added that there was a single borrower limit for IDA, which for FY22 had been set at $45 billion. That is 25% of $180.9 billion of equity as of June 30th, 2021. The African Export-Import Bank, Afreximbank, has announced funding and technical support to the Youth Alliance for Leadership and Development in Africa, YALDA, an international non-profit organization that aims to contribute to the development of Africa's young leaders and enhance youth participation in the implementation and achievement of the African Continental Free Trade Area. The support will cover YALDA's activities and events which aim to provide a platform for African youth, both within Africa and in the diaspora. These activities encourage them to participate in the implementation of the AFTA under a campaign named the Umoja Africa Campaign, Youth Contributing to the Implementation of the AFTA. The campaign will also use various platforms to create awareness of the concepts, benefits, and opportunities that are available to youth through regional integration and intra-Africa trade. The Debt Management Office says that the federal government would offer 150 billion naira bonds for subscription in August. A circular by the DMO on its website showed that the breakdown of bonds comprised of 3 bonds worth 50 billion naira each. They are 10-year reopening bond to be offered at a rate of 13.98% and to mature in February 2028. A 20-year reopening bond to be offered at 12.40% and mature in March 2036, and the third and longest bond, which is a 30-year reopening bond, to be offered at 12.98% and mature in March 2050. The bonds will be auctioned in August. Gold inches lower on firm dollar and yields while U.S. inflation data in focus. Let's see the commodities market. The federal government have raised concerns over the high cases of projection of agricultural produce in the United States and European commodity markets. The United States is yet to lift embargo on dried fish from Nigeria, while other produce are being subjected to quarantine before it's allowed into the country. Of recent, large quantity of snails were also confiscated by the authorities in the U.S., in Europe, and also dry beans from Nigeria is also not allowed, though Nigeria have been advised to improve on quality and packaging of produce meant for any of these European markets. It is in this light that Nigeria Agricultural Quarantine Service is yet to carry out pre-quarantine of all produce before being exported out. This includes produce from personal consumption or trade. The quarantine service said in a statement in Abuja that any person that pushed produce without clarification will be blacklisted. Joining me to discuss the challenges of agricultural produce export is Director General Nigeria Agricultural Quarantine Services, Dr. Vincent Esigbe. Doctor, you're welcome to Business Express.
Thank you very much.
Well, Doctor, like we've heard in the preview, there is this directive that your organization will blacklist any person that breaks the quarantine guidelines. What does this imply and what are actually these guidelines?
Yeah, thank you very much for this opportunity once again by the NTA.
Yeah.
It's a national embarrassment for citizens not to obey simple rules of trade and even in any other sector. It's mandatory for exports that people who export should follow the rules. Because Nigeria is not a nation in isolation. We belong to certain trading blocks and certain regulatory blocks like the WTO and other bodies, for which Nigeria must duly comply with the rules and regulations concerning such organizations. For the quarantine service, being the national body responsible for the inspection certification of agricultural produce, there are regulations, and those regulations are simple. One, we have what we call the export certification value chain, and then the usual standard operating procedures for each of those commodities or products. So it's simple. And it's not expensive. You can imagine where they charge like 100 Naira per ton.
Okay.
Or like 500 Naira per a whole container. So these are not things that should deter people from coming. And let's look at it, even in our personal home, in our homes. Food that is supposed to be eaten are supposed to be produced in a certain way for us to feel
meet
comfortable.
certain healthy standards.
Yes.
Okay.
So if you are exporting agricultural produce, it is mandatory that you approach the quarantine service. Countries have different procedures and processes for accepting each commodity.
Could it be that a lot of people out there are not informed of these guidelines, of these criteria they need to meet? And I understand in this particular case, this context we're talking about commodities for trade and also for personal uses. There are times that Nigerians want to travel outside this country and possibly are going to a country where its food, its delicacies might not be that acceptable to one's system. So one would like to take something that you are used to, something that your system tolerates. How do you get the right information to get to know what am I supposed to go for checks at the quarantine unit or at the airport, or I'm not supposed to take out of this country at a particular point in time?
Well, last week? Last week we were running adverts on NT concerning what to do concerning agricultural produce across borders. We did on fruits, we did on other commodities. And I think by now every Nigerian should be aware, I hope so, that there's a government agency responsible for screening or ensuring that whatever you are taking out, is what you're supposed to take out. What you are taking out as a delicacy for you here may be poison somewhere else.
Like in the case of the snails, what actually happened? And how often do we get this rejection?
The case of the snail, the particular species is a very invasive species, which means that you cannot take it from here to that country.
Oh, okay.
Like the case of Trogodema for hibiscus, in 1946, that Trogodema has been eliminated in Mexico. And this particular snail, I think in 1965, it was eliminated in the US. The US spent almost $1 million US dollars, in trying to eradicate it. So it is not a local species in the US. So it's important that if you need to travel outside, find out, is this acceptable? The snails we are talking about, in some countries, if it is processed and frozen, they will accept it. And it is surprising that some countries even accept the live snails.
Okay.
So it's important for every exporter, whether for domestic use or for trade, to approach the quarantine service. That, okay, look, I want to travel with this. Yeah. What do I do about it?
Okay, Director, this is for free. You are not paying.
Yes.
Can you give us some of these guidelines, let Nigerians get to understand, for intending travelers or
now,
exporters?
It will take us probably 1 week for us to expose all the guidelines. But in simple terms, I'll group them.
Okay.
Talk of yams and tubers. Tubers and roots, they have a group of their own. Cereals, grains, they have a group of their own. Fruits have a group of their own. Then vegetables, like that. So if you are going with, say, grains, you must make sure that they don't have excess level of pesticides. They are clean, they don't have weevils, and they are well processed to take outside. Then if you talk of groups like tubers, you must ensure that the head is neat and clean.
Okay. So
that it doesn't grow muco on the head. That's like fungus.
Yeah, okay.
And they are slim. Most of the yam tubers are between 1.8 to 2.2 kilograms.
Okay, there are specifications.
That's the standard for that. Not our big Jalingo tubers or the Benue big massive tubers. No, those ones don't go to the US or the EU. Then if you talk of things like ginger, that's another oil product that
Buko can easily grow. After commodity.
Yes, Buko can easily grow on it. So you need to make sure that it is clean. It doesn't have sand. It's well properly clean and dry. The moisture content will be very, very low. So each one has its own peculiarities.
Okay, we have a challenge of value addition and challenge of processing some of these things to meet some of these standards. What do you think can be done to ensure that we meet this standard so that we can also increase our export volume of commodities?
That is the area the quarantine is concentrating now. Okay. That's the importance of the export certification value chain. I'll just give you an example. Nigeria exports is the largest producer of cassava.
Okay.
It produces about 60 million metric tons. Vietnam produces half of that quantity. But Nigeria earns only 1.25 million US dollars, while Thailand earns about 1.8 billion. 1.25 million against 1.8 billion.
That's a huge difference.
And we produce the largest, while they produce half. The issue is that they've been able to identify the species that can give them ethanol, that can give them other byproducts from cassava. So they're making a lot of money from it. While Nigeria, we've not been able to do that. We just produce just for the number. We're the largest producer, but we earn the minimum from export. So value addition is very, very important, that for every agricultural produce, if you add value to it, you earn more money. For cashew nuts, roasting, salting, and spicing will make a lot of change, between 1,000 to 1,400+% difference in value of US dollar that you can get.
We're talking dollars now.
Yes. So it's important that we don't just produce, but we add value to whatever we're producing. And if we do that, you will see that we're going to make a lot of money. Don't forget, Netherlands, they are beginning to grow cocoa in their greenhouses. The Chinese have started exporting cocoa. And the clause they put is that it is from, how did they put it? They said
which is to say
non-contaminated soil or something like that. So they're already putting a clause that will attract their product in the market.
And not just about us. There is no longer monopoly for Nigeria in that market.
Good. And it's one of the biggest export commodities that we have. So if oil is going down and we are not serious with agriculture, you can imagine what would be in the next 10 years from now.
I think government is doing a whole lot to ensure that this gap is being breached. Well, still talking about these checks, I understand that most of the cases we've had is that when people are taking these commodities out, either for export or for personal use, they get to go through these checks at the exit point. How about entry? People, where foreigners coming to Nigeria, do they also go through some of these checks, or they have a free leeway?
No, everybody goes through the customs or immigration checks, whether you're going in or you're coming out. The issue with agricultural produce is that, there was this government circular in 2011 that delineated the number of agencies that will be at the proper point. For now, we are not strategically placed at those exit and entry points. And that's why this woman could, move those snails across, from one country to another. And most of the major rejections that we flag against Nigeria, they are prohibitive items. Largely prohibitive items. Not because they are bad, but they are prohibitive in the sense that they are not allowed to enter that country that they intended to.
Okay.
The second on the list is that most of them bypass quarantine.
So the message now is whoever is traveling, you have to go through the quarantine.
Anybody who
whether
is
it's for
traveling,
export, whether it's for personal use,
is carrying any agricultural produce, must necessarily pass through the quarantine service.
Thank you so very much.
Embarrassment.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Vincent, the Sigbe Director General, Nigeria Agri Quarantine Services, for giving us this insight. A lot of Nigerians out there, I know, get to know what to do next and to make the whole process better. Thank you for coming on Business Express.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. Well, moving on, the introduction of annual finance bills and measures taken to reduce cost of governance are some of the reform measures government is taking to address the long-standing challenge of domestic revenue mobilization, which is now gaining ground through continued implementation of the Strategic Revenue Generation Initiative. Nneka Oko reports that the Minister of Finance, Budget and National Planning, Zainab Ahmed, gave the insight at the National Dialogue on COVID-19, Economic Impact and Assessment of the National and State Recovery Plans and Policy Option in Abuja.
We will continue to improve the enabling environment for the private sector to ensure the creation of jobs and to support diversification away from oil and gas. In particular, we are also implementing programs that are aimed at creating jobs for our youths, supporting MSMEs, and furthermore, we are scaling up interventions that are aimed at improving economic empowerment of women and girls.
Oil prices on Wednesday consolidated strong overnight gains as a bullish outlook for U.S. fuel demand outweighed concerns about mobility caps in Asia with the spread of the highly infectious COVID-19 Delta variant. Industry data showed U.S. crude oil and gasoline inventories fell last week, while the U.S. Energy Information Administration raised its forecast for fuel demand in 2021 and said consumption in May through July was higher than expected. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude futures rose 6 cents to $68.35 a barrel, adding to a 2.7% jump on Tuesday. Brent crude futures inched up 3% to $70.66 a barrel, following a 2.3% gain from Tuesday. Well, Chinese stocks muted as shares of indebted property developer Evergrande and its units soar. Bosede Abel brings us up to speed on the global market update. Bosede, is over to you.
Thank you very much, Benny. Hello and welcome to the markets. Global stocks continue to strive even as the Delta variant COVID-19 pandemic ravages global economies. European stocks were mixed on Wednesday as global markets remained cautious, with investors monitoring COVID-19 developments and key economic data. DAX rose by 0.08%, FTSE 0.46%, and CAC 40 was 0.32% higher. Asian markets were mixed on Wednesday, with most major markets eking out modest gains. Oil stock in the region jumped on the back of higher oil prices. The Shanghai Composite closed just above the flat line to 3,532.62. Hang Seng Index rose 0.2% in the final hour of trading, and the Nikkei also topped 0.65% to close at 28,070.51. In the United States, stock index futures were little changed ahead of a big reading on inflation that could determine how fast the Federal Reserve moves to take away monetary stimulus. July's consumer price index reading will be released today, Wednesday. If the report comes in as hotter than expected, stocks could take a hit. However, as figures continue to roll in this Wednesday, futures contracts tied to the Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 0.46%. The S&P 500 futures were slightly positive and Nasdaq 100 futures were off by 0.49%. While in Africa, markets followed the trend of their counterparts in other continents as they opened mixed. Ghana's GSA Composite was marginally positive. Nairobi's all-share gained 0.04%, and Namibia's overall index also rose 0.66% to close at 1,525.98, while Tunisia's Tunidex and South Africa's JSA Africa Top 40 were negative. That's the market review segment. I'm sorry we couldn't get the graphics on time, but subsequently we'll get to see them, Benny.
Thank you so very much, Bosede, for that update. Let's now see how the Naira is exchanging for other currencies. Business Express returns Thursday at 9:30 a.m. Be safe out there. I am Benny Adams saying keep thinking and doing business.